The sprawling modern home of Mark Reynolds was a place of sharp angles and cold surfaces, a monument to success that often felt more like a museum than a place where a child lived. Today, however, it was a war zone of pastel-colored decorations and the low, simmering panic of a man entirely out of his depth. Mark, a man whose name on a corporate memo could send a ripple of fear through an entire department, stood in the center of his own kitchen, a victim of his own overwhelming need for control. Balloons in various states of inflation lay around him like fallen comrades, and a battalion of prepackaged goodie bags stood at attention on the granite countertop, awaiting deployment. His phone was wedged between his shoulder and his ear, a constant, buzzing reminder of the world he was momentarily neglecting. "No, Henderson, the projections for Q3 are non-negotiable," he barked into the receiver, his voice a low growl that was entirely at odds with the cheerful, crinkly sound of the happy birthday banner hanging lopsidedly behind him. "I don't care what the analytics team says. I want it on my desk by Monday or heads will roll." He ended the call without a goodbye, his fingers pinching the bridge of his nose. The pressure was a constant, a tight band around his temples. This party was not just a party, it was a performance, a crucial piece of networking, and his sole focus was on one member of the audience. Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, sat quietly at the kitchen island, swinging her legs. She was a small, thoughtful creature with eyes that saw far more than her father gave her credit for. She watched him not with excitement, but with a gentle concern, her small fingers tracing the pattern on the marble. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft. "Ms. Albright said she might be a little late." The mention of the teacher's name made Mark's head snap up. Ms. Albright was not just Lily's third-grade teacher. She was an institution at the prestigious academy, a woman whose opinion could reportedly influence everything from class placement to future scholarship opportunities. Her acceptance of the invitation had been Mark's single greatest victory in the party's planning phase. "That's fine, sweetheart. The important people always are," Mark said, his tone softening only for her. He forced a smile. "We want everything to be perfect for her, right? And for you, of course." The "of course" felt like an afterthought even to him. He was so focused on the impression he needed to make on the adults, particularly the formidable Ms. Albright, that the simple, joyful premise of a child's birthday party had been almost entirely eclipsed. The clowns, the magicians, the ponies, he'd researched them all with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to mergers and acquisitions, finally settling on a high-end entertainment agency that promised unparalleled theatrical experiences for the discerning client. He'd booked their premium package, envisioning a grand, spectacular figure that would be the talk of the school. The doorbell rang, a sharp, melodic chime that cut through the house. "That must be her," Mark said, a flash of genuine relief on his face. He was expecting the clown. He was also expecting a crucial document couriered from the office. He strode to the door, already mentally composing the email he would send once he signed for the package. He pulled the heavy oak door open with a flourish, a confident corporate greeting already on his lips. The words died there. The woman on his doorstep was not a corporate courier. She was also not the grandiose spectacle of professional entertainment he had anticipated. She was instead a woman of perhaps 30, standing in a simple, slightly faded polka-dot jumpsuit. A small, well-worn suitcase sat at her feet. Her clown makeup was cheerful, bright red yarn for hair, a smiling red mouth and delicate stars painted around her eyes, but it was understated, almost humble. She looked less like a star performer and more like someone who had lovingly assembled her costume from a thrift store box. Mark's face, so open a moment before, shuttered closed. His eyes performed a quick, dismissive inventory, the homemade look of the costume, the lack of any flashy props, the modest suitcase. This was the unparalleled theatrical experience? He felt a hot wave of disappointment and, worse, embarrassment. What would Ms. Albright think? This wasn't impressive, it was quaint. Amateur. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dropping its previous eager tone and adopting the cold, flat politeness he usually reserved for incompetent interns. The woman's smile, which had been warm and genuine, didn't falter, though it perhaps became a little more fixed. "Hello. I'm Sparkles. I'm here for the birthday party," she said, her voice melodious and kind beneath the cheerful persona. Mark's worst fears were confirmed. This was it. This was the premium package. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Right. Sparkles." He stepped back to let her in, his movements stiff. "I have to be honest," he said, his voice low so the children already gathering in the backyard wouldn't hear. "I was expecting something a bit more substantial from the agency. A bigger production." Sparkles blinked, her head tilting slightly. The agency? Oh no, I think there must be a mix-up. I'm an independent performer. Your assistant booked me directly weeks ago. She said you were looking for something personal and fun for your daughter. Mark waved a hand, dismissing the explanation. The details were irrelevant. The result was standing in his foyer and it was inadequate. Well, whatever. The main thing is the children are all here and some very important guests. I need you to do your job efficiently. No mess. The face painting and balloons are set up on the patio. Just stick to the basics and try to stay out of the way. He spoke to her as if she were a faulty appliance he was instructing a repairman on. A problem to be managed, not a person to be welcomed. He didn't offer a thank you. He didn't ask if she needed a glass of water after what was likely a long trip. He simply pointed through the house toward the back garden. They're all out back. Don't track anything on the floors. A faint flicker of something, not anger but a patient understanding, passed behind the woman's eyes. She simply nodded, hefted her suitcase, and made her way through the immaculate house as directed. Mark watched her go, feeling a sense of annoyance that this was the centerpiece of his daughter's entertainment. He turned his attention back to his phone, already forgetting her. Outside, a transformation began. The children, initially shy, were drawn to Sparkles not by garish spectacle, but by a quiet, magnetic warmth. She didn't just twist balloons into swords, she told a story with each one, creating a menagerie of characters that came to life in her hands. She didn't just paint faces, she held quiet, earnest conversations with each child, asking them what they wanted to be, a fierce tiger, a glittery fairy, a brave astronaut. She saw the shy child hovering on the periphery and, with gentle magic, drew them into the circle without a hint of pressure. Lily, his own daughter, was radiant, her laughter ringing out clear and true, her eyes glued to Sparkles with pure, unadulterated admiration. Mark, meanwhile, was busy holding court. He had successfully cornered Ms. Albright, a stern-looking woman with a severe bun, and was regaling her with the story of his latest corporate triumph, subtly weaving in details about the house's architecture and the exclusive caterers he'd hired. He gestured broadly to the lavish spread of food, completely missing the fact that the real heart of the party was happening not at the gourmet snack table, but in the humble circle of children gathered around the clown he had so thoroughly dismissed. It was during a moment of this self-congratulatory tour that he saw it. Sparkles was kneeling in front of the son of a prominent local architect, a quiet boy named Oliver who had been clinging to his mother's leg all afternoon. Sparkles wasn't painting his face or offering him a balloon. She was talking to him, her hands moving expressively, telling him a quiet story. To Mark's ego-blinded eyes, it looked like she was bothering the child, holding him hostage, preventing him from joining the other, more rambunctious games. He saw the boy's mother looking on with a slightly concerned expression, or what Mark interpreted as concern. This was exactly what he'd wanted to avoid. This was unscripted, amateurish, and it was involving the child of an important guest. A fresh bolt of irritation shot through him. He excused himself from Ms. Albright and marched across the patio, his dress shoes clicking decisively on the stone. He descended upon the small scene like a corporate raider, his presence immediately casting a shadow. The children nearby fell silent. He didn't address the boy. He didn't ask what was happening. He looked directly at Sparkles, his voice loud and dripping with condescension, ensuring that not only she but the surrounding parents could hear him clearly. "Excuse me. Sparkles, is it?" He began as if he'd forgotten her name. "I believe I was clear. Stick to the balloons and the face painting. We don't need any amateur child psychology here, thank you. Just do the job you were hired for." The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. The cheerful noise of the party seemed to be sucked into a vacuum. Parents looked away, uncomfortable. The boy Oliver shrunk back. Sparkles looked up at him. The cheerful clown's smile was still painted on her face, but her eyes, within the circles of white and starry blue, held a depth of dignity that Mark was completely incapable of seeing in that moment. She didn't argue. She didn't justify. She simply gave a small, slow nod and looked down at her suitcase. Mark turned on his heel, satisfied that he had reasserted control and prevented a scene. He walked back toward the adults, completely missing the way his daughter Lily was looking at him, her earlier radiance dimmed, replaced by a confused and quiet disappointment. He had gotten what he wanted. The clown was put in her place. He felt no humiliation in that moment, only the cold satisfaction of a problem solved. The true humiliation, he would soon discover, was not what he had inflicted, but what he had so blindly and arrogantly brought upon himself. The final strains of off-key happy birthday had faded, the last of the sugared-up children had been whisked away by relieved parents, and the grand echoing house of Mark Reynolds was left in a state of post-apocalyptic stillness. The air, once buzzing with shrieks and laughter, now hung heavy with the scent of melted ice cream and the ghost of spilled fruit punch. Mark stood amidst the wreckage of wrapping paper and discarded party hats, surveying the scene not with paternal nostalgia, but with the weary satisfaction of a project manager whose key deliverables had been, for the most part, met. The caterers were efficiently boxing up untouched delicacies, their movements hushed and professional. The most critical objective, he reflected as he loosened his tie, had been achieved. Ms. Albright had stayed for the cake cutting, had offered a tight, formal smile, and had even complimented the quality of the organic lemonade. It was a small victory, but in the world of Mark Reynolds, small victories were collated into the grand ledger of success. He found Lily sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, still wearing her slightly smudged sparkles face paint, a half-inflated balloon animal, a lopsided dog, clutched in her hand. She looked small and tired, but a residual glow of happiness clung to her. "Daddy," she said, her voice sleepy, "that was the best party ever. Sparkles was so magic." She said the word with utter seriousness, investing it with a weight far beyond simple trickery. Mark ruffled her hair, his mind already clicking forward to the emails piling up in his inbox. "She was okay, Pumpkin. Did her job, I suppose. Next year, though, we'll get a real show. Maybe a miniaturized Ferris wheel for the backyard, something truly impressive." He said it absently, already mentally drafting the request for quotes from amusement park contractors. He completely missed the way Lily's face fell slightly at the dismissal of her hero, the way her small fingers tightened protectively around the balloon dog. To him, the clown was a line item, a service rendered and now concluded. He had paid the woman her fee at the door, handing over the cash in an envelope with the same detached efficiency he would use to sign an expense report, offering a curt "thank you" that was a social formality, utterly devoid of actual gratitude. The woman, still in her faded costume, had taken it, offered a silent nod that he didn't bother to interpret, and vanished into the evening, a ghost dismissed from his perfectly ordered world. The following morning, the housekeeper had restored order, erasing all physical evidence of the celebration. Mark was back in his element, ensconced in his home office, the sharp smell of high-end coffee replacing the sweet scent of cake. Sunlight streamed through the pristine windows, illuminating a world of polished surfaces and silent, expensive technology. Lily was at the kitchen table, contentedly drawing pictures of a smiling clown surrounded by a circle of stick-figure children. The piece was brittle, a calm unaware of the storm already turning on the horizon. The phone call, when it came, did not come to his cell phone, the number he gave for business. It rang on the landline, the old-fashioned house phone that rarely ever sounded, its shrill tone an archaic intrusion into the modern quiet. Mark frowned, annoyed at the interruption. He considered letting it go to voicemail, but some faint, lingering sense of paternal duty, the thought it could be the school about some mundane matter, made him snatch up the receiver. "Reynolds' residence," he said, his voice crisp and impatient. The voice on the other end was like chipped ice. It was Ms. Albright. And it was devoid of any of the polite, party-day civility it had held yesterday. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, and the use of his formal name felt like an accusation. There was no small talk, no pleasant preamble. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mark's CEO instincts prickled. This was not a friendly call. "Ms. Albright. To what do I owe the pleasure? I hope Lily wasn't too oversugared yesterday," he said, attempting a charm that felt suddenly brittle and false. She bypassed his attempt entirely. "I am calling concerning the entertainment you hired for your daughter's party. The individual who performed under the moniker, Sparkles, She pronounced the name with a precise, clinical distaste, as if referring to a biological specimen. Mark's frown deepened. What was this? A complaint? Had the clown messed up one of the children's faces? Left a stain on someone's designer outfit? A fresh wave of irritation washed over him. That woman. He knew she was trouble. "Ah yes. Her. I apologize if her performance was not up to standard. I found her rather underwhelming myself. I assure you, when I book entertainment, I typically use a much more reputable agency. There was apparently a mix-up with my assistant." He was already crafting the narrative, positioning himself as the victim of subpar service, the discerning client who had been unfortunately let down. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound, so heavy with unspoken contempt, that it finally gave Mark pause. When Ms. Albright spoke again, her words were slow, deliberate, and meticulously chosen for maximum impact. "Mr. Reynolds," she repeated, and the name was now a weapon. I recognized her. Despite the costume and the makeup, it was the cadence of her speech, the particular way she engages with children. It was unmistakable. Mark's hand holding the phone felt suddenly numb. A cold, unfamiliar sensation, the first faint drip of dread, began to pool in his stomach. "Recognized her?" he echoed, his voice losing its confident edge. That, Ms. Albright said, each word a nail being hammered into the coffin of his pride, was Dr. Chloe Fields. The name hung in the air between them, meaningless to Mark for a terrifying second. It was a name that conjured nothing. A blank space. I'm afraid I don't," he stammered. "Dr. Chloe Fields," Ms. Albright repeated, her voice sharpening with incredulity at his ignorance. "The author of The Developing Mind, Fostering Resilience in Childhood. The seminal text that our entire school district's child development curriculum is based upon. The woman who keynotes national education conferences. The psychologist who consults with some of the most prestigious learning institutions in the country." With each credential, each accomplishment, Mark felt the floor beneath him soften, felt the walls of his expensive, powerful office begin to tilt. "She is a luminary in her field, Mr. Reynolds. A respected academic and a renowned author. She also, I have learned, volunteers her time performing as a clown for children in long-term hospital care. It is her passion project. A personal charity. She rarely does private events. I can only assume she was doing a personal favor for someone." Mark was no longer standing. He had sunk into his leather chair, the receiver pressed hard against his ear. The world had shrunk to the sound of her voice and the frantic, hammering pulse in his own throat. The woman in the faded polka-dot suit. The humble suitcase. The kind eyes. "We don't need any amateur child psychology here, thank you." The words echoed in his mind, not in his own voice, but in the voice of a monumental, historic fool. Ms. Albright was not finished. "Your display yesterday was educational. It was a masterclass in the precise brand of arrogance we try to teach our students to see beyond. To witness you speak to a woman of her stature with such breathtaking condescension. Well, it provided a very clear window into the values at play in your household. It was certainly far more revealing than any parent-teacher conference could ever be. Ms. Albright, I had no idea." He managed to choke out, the words ash in his mouth. It was the weakest, most pathetic defense imaginable, and they both knew it. "That," she said with final, devastating simplicity, "is abundantly clear." There was a soft click on the line. She had hung up. The dial tone buzzed in his ear, a flat, meaningless sound in the new, horrifying silence of his world. For a long minute, Mark simply sat there, paralyzed. The humiliation was not a slow creep. It was a tsunami crashing over him all at once, drowning him in a roiling sea of his own ignorance and pride. He saw the look in her eyes again, the dignity he had mistaken for submission. He heard his own voice, loud and stupid, belittling a woman who spent her weekends bringing joy to sick children. He saw the faces of the other parents, their uncomfortable silence now making perfect, cringe-inducing sense. They had known, or some of them had, and they had watched him make a spectacle of himself. With trembling hands he dropped the phone and fumbled for his laptop. His fingers, usually so sure and swift on the keyboard, felt thick and clumsy. He typed the name into the search engine. Dr. Chloe Fields. The screen filled with results. Academic profiles from prestigious universities. Links to peer-reviewed journals. A Wikipedia page. News articles praising her innovative work. And there, at the top of the image results, was a professional headshot. It was her. There was no doubt. The intelligent, calm eyes, the kind smile, now framed by sleek, professional hair, wearing a tasteful blazer. She was holding a copy of her book. His eyes scanned the page, seizing on fragments of text. Leading expert, groundbreaking research, highly sought-after speaker. He then typed another search, Dr. Chloe Fields clown. The results were different but no less devastating. Local news features. A blog post from a children's hospital charity. Photos of her, in a simpler version of the Sparkles makeup, sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, holding the hand of a pale, smiling child surrounded by 4 poles. The headline read, Dr. Chloe Fields, where psychology meets joy, one smile at a time. Mark pushed back from the desk as if it had burned him. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at his perfectly manicured lawn, his gleaming sports car in the driveway, the symbols of a success that felt suddenly hollow and pathetic. He had spent a lifetime building an empire, cultivating an image of power and intelligence. And in one afternoon, in a few casually cruel sentences, he had exposed himself as the smallest, most foolish man in the room. The weight of his error was physical, a crushing pressure on his chest. The party had been a success. The clown had been a hit with the children. And he, Mark Reynolds, CO, had been the only true clown there, performing a humiliating act of arrogance for an audience who saw him with perfect, pitying clarity. The discovery was complete. And it was utterly ruinous. The grand, silent house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a museum dedicated to the ego of its owner. 4 hours, Mark Reynolds remained motionless, a statue of shame staring out at a world that had fundamentally recalibrated his place within it. The sleek lines of his car, the flawless expanse of the lawn, the cold gleam of the stainless steel appliances in the kitchen, all of it seemed to mock him. These were the trappings of a man who believed his success granted him clarity of vision, the right to assess and dismiss. Now they were just evidence of his profound blindness. The memory of his own voice, dripping with condescension, played on a loop in his mind, a torturous recording he could not shut off. We don't need any amateur child psychology here. Each syllable was a fresh lash. He had not merely been rude to an employee, he had insulted a scholar, a benefactor, a woman who dedicated her free time to the most vulnerable of children, and he had done so in front of his own daughter and her entire community. The humiliation was acid, eating away at the very foundation of his self-image. This was not a problem a business strategy could solve. This was not a hostile takeover he could engineer or a quarterly loss he could spin. This was a moral bankruptcy, and the only currency that could possibly begin to address it was a humility so complete and genuine it felt foreign to his very being. A phone call was insufficient. An email was cowardice. A check, no matter how large, would be just another arrogant gesture from a man who believed money could erase any offense. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the only path forward led directly to her face to face. He had to stand before Dr. Chloe Fields, without the armor of his title or his wealth, and offer an apology that had no defense, no excuse, and no expectation of forgiveness. It was the most terrifying prospect he had ever faced. He found Lily in her room, carefully placing her drawing of Sparkles and the children into a large folder to protect it. The sight of her innocent reverence for the woman he had scorned was a knife to his heart. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level, his movements uncharacteristically slow and heavy. "Lily," he began, his voice rough with emotion. I made a very big mistake yesterday. A very bad one. I was unkind to Sparkles. I was wrong and I need to go and tell her I'm sorry." Lily looked at him, her young face serious, absorbing his words. She didn't ask why. She simply nodded, a wisdom in her eyes that far exceeded her years. "She was really nice, Daddy. You should say sorry." "Will you come with me?" he asked, the request feeling both selfish and necessary. He needed her there not as a shield, but as a reminder of what truly mattered, as a beacon of the simple, unadorned goodness he had so carelessly trampled. He needed her to witness that even fathers, even CEOs, could be wrong, and that acknowledging it was not a weakness but the first step toward becoming stronger. Lily took his hand. "Okay." The drive to the address he had found for Dr. Fields's private practice was undertaken in a silence that was entirely new between them. It was not an empty or awkward silence, but a full one, thick with unspoken thought and a shared, solemn purpose. Mark's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, rehearsing words that felt inadequate before he even gave them voice. The building, when they arrived, was not a flashy corporate tower but a quiet, tasteful brownstone with a discreet plaque by the door. It spoke of competence and grace, not showmanship. Each step toward the door felt like a mile. The receptionist, a warm-faced woman, greeted them. Before Mark could fully explain himself, an inner office door opened. It was her. Dr. Chloe Fields. She was dressed in a simple, elegant sweater and slacks, her hair down and framing a face that was now free of makeup, both clown and professional. She looked exactly like her photograph, intelligent, calm, and in this moment, utterly inscrutable. She showed no surprise, only a quiet, assessing stillness. The receptionist melted away, leaving the three of them in the hushed space of the waiting room. "Dr. Fields," Mark began, his voice cracking on the first syllable. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to stand straight, to meet her gaze, to not look away from the consequences of his actions. Lily's small hand was an anchor in his. The rehearsed speech vanished, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth. There is no excuse for my behavior at my daughter's party. I was arrogant, judgmental, and deeply disrespectful. I treated you with a contempt I had no right to feel, based on nothing but my own ignorant prejudice. I am more sorry than I can possibly express. Not just for insulting you but for failing to see the incredible person you are and the beautiful thing you were doing for those children, especially for my daughter." He paused, the words hanging in the air, stark and simple. He did not mention her credentials. He did not mention Ms. Albright. He took full sole ownership of his failings. "I told you to stick to balloons," he said, the memory making him flinch. "But you gave them joy. Real joy. And I was too much of a fool to see it." Lily, sensing her cue, stepped forward slightly, holding up her protected drawing. "I drew a picture for you, Sparkles. Thank you for my party. It was the best one." The moment Lily spoke, the professional mask of Dr. Fields completely dissolved. Her eyes, which had been so guarded, softened, filling with a warmth that was entirely for the child. She knelt down, taking the drawing with genuine reverence. "Lily, this is the most wonderful gift. Thank you so much. I had the best time with you and your friends." She looked at the drawing for a long moment, then back up at Mark. The anger was gone from her expression, replaced by something more complex. A weary understanding and perhaps a flicker of pity for the man who had so recently needed to be the biggest person in the room and was now realizing how small that had made him. She stood up, holding Lily's drawing. "Thank you for this, Mark," she said, using his first name, and the act felt like a tiny thread of grace. "This," she said, gesturing with the drawing, "is a real apology. And bringing Lily, that shows you understand what this is really about." She took a slow breath. "What I do, the clowning, it's a reminder. A reminder that value and character are never, ever defined by a job title or a costume. It's about the heart behind it. You were so focused on the image of the party, you almost missed the party itself." Mark could only nod, the truth of her words settling into him, finally finding fertile ground where his pride had once been. "I don't want your money for me," she stated, her voice firm but not unkind. "But if you truly want to make a gesture, the children's hospital where I volunteer is always in need of support. They use donations for art supplies, new toys, music therapy. Things that bring moments of light to some very brave kids." It was the perfect penance. It was not about him. It was not a transaction to clear his conscience. It was an action that would extend the very joy he had tried to diminish. Of course. Immediately. "And it will be significant," he said, the words a vow. He reached out and she shook his hand. It was not a gesture of friendship but of acceptance. The lesson had been delivered and it had been received. As they walked back to the car, Lily slipped her hand back into his. The silence on the drive home was different. Lighter. The crushing weight was gone, replaced by a quiet, sober resolution. He looked at his daughter, who had understood the value of Sparkles instantly, without any of the filters of status and ego that had blinded him. "You know, Lily," he said, his voice quiet and full of a new conviction. "It doesn't matter if someone is a CEO in a big office or a clown in a polka-dot suit. What matters is if they are a good person. And I have a lot to learn about how to be one." Lily smiled, a sunny, forgiving expression. "It's okay, Daddy. You learned today." He had. The humiliation had been profound, the discovery shattering, but the apology, offered and accepted, had been the beginning of something new. It was the first day of a much more important education. If you've ever underestimated someone based on how they look or what they do, take a moment to look deeper. The most valuable lessons often come from the people we least expect. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of humility and the importance of seeing the true heart in everyone.